So at the risk of getting myself into some more online trouble, I decided to bring up another topic of discussion that's something that's been sort of rolling in my head. I have mentioned it a little bit before, but first I'm going to give a little bit of context. In one of my previous creative endeavors, I did a little bit of a podcast where we would watch something and like almost MST3000 style, we sort of had a podcast. We would commentate over a piece of media, usually a movie or a television show, and then we would record a podcast afterwards talking about it. And in one of those discussions, I sort of brought up the idea of the fluidity of cultural continuity and the importance of certain pieces of media as time goes by. And that in combination with the fact that people are being born every day and the fact that new people being exposed to art is always a constant flow of new people, it creates an interesting conundrum. Namely, what would a child who is born today and grows up to be at whatever age their parents deem appropriate for them to watch, like the original Star Wars, is that something that will be important or even resonate with someone in a modern context if they are born now versus if they were born in the past? You see, someone born in the 60s may have seen Star Wars in the 70s, and it was this revolutionary, very important jump of sci-fi in the mainstream. But we've entered a whole other era of media, and the importance of the original Star Wars in its time and place is it's phenomenal, right? It can't be overlooked. But how relevant is that moving forward to the next generation? If someone's looking at Star Wars from modern eyes, it's going to be something where even the television shows that they watch that are cheaply produced for children are going to probably have better CGI than the original Star Wars movies, which were using miniatures and puppets and very basic CGI. You see, we've technologically moved a lot forward, and science fiction has become accepted in the mainstream. And when you look at Star Wars, if you like break it down from an overhead perspective, what we're looking at is a fairly simple version of the hero's journey. That and everything in the world, of course, after Star Wars, cribbed a little bit from Star Wars to where we've seen elements of all of the Star Wars movies in a lot of modern films. If someone is young and they are exposed to something that uses those elements at any age, and then they're by choice or forced to go back and watch the old Star Wars movies, do those movies work for someone young? And in many cases, anecdotally, what I've seen is if a child has seen anything in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Star Wars just feels incredibly dated. And the modern Star Wars films are supposed to appeal to the fans of the past while also bringing in new fans, but the new Star Wars trilogy has, of course, been a mixed bag, even though it made a ton of money. But the question remains, what do you do as time moves on and the important historical landmark milestones of the past become less culturally relevant in the modern context? Does that make any sense? Essentially, to someone who is new to experiencing art, things that are derivative of things past will become the new important things for the new generation. I want to make sure that I'm making sense. Let's state it this way. If someone is 16 years old today and they watch a movie that mimics something from the past in every way, their only touchstone to the thing that's been mimicked is the mimicker instead of the progenitor. To a lot of people, the mimicker may seem like a waste of time, a copy, something that's not interesting because it's something that they've seen before, but to the new person, their touchstone for that concept will be the mimicker and not the progenitor. And as generations move forward, the new mimicker will always be the current cultural touchstone instead of the originator. I don't think that the originator loses its relevance to history. I don't think that the originator loses its relevance to people that have been around long enough to see that thing. But since there's always people entering the field of new exposure to media, things that are derivative and less innovative will always be important to them in the way that the original originator was to the original audience that saw that thing. Because of that, things that are the progenitor of original ideas in the past start to feel dated, and elements that are not the core concept will feel extremely dated. Movies from the 80s have characters wearing certain styles of clothing that may not be popular, or have music that's not very popular, but they may have a core concept that's original, a core concept that gets lifted out of that original piece of media and placed into a new piece of media where that piece could be a huge deal for someone that's never seen it before. An example from my own life is I did not see the movie Mission Impossible until I was an adult. And by the time that I saw the movie Mission Impossible, I didn't care for it at all, because everything that probably made that movie special when it came out are things that I've seen done more interestingly by things that I've experienced in my generation. So when I watched the original Mission Impossible, it felt like elements of everything that I've seen before done in a non-original way, regardless of what it did at its time. I feel the same way about Stephen King's The Shining, which I read last year. Stephen King's The Shining may have been this big, important book when it came out that was original and did a lot of original things, but I've seen things that have come after The Shining. So when I went back and read The Shining, the actual book, for myself, nothing in that book felt that special. It felt like elements of things that, from my perspective, seemed done better by things from my generation, things that came from after The Shining, things that took inspiration from The Shining. I think this is the reason often why critics of a media who are very well read in something can have vastly different opinions than an audience of mainstream people who may not be as well educated in an area. Additionally, I think this can be one of the reasons that the older generations and the younger generations have a little bit of a communicative divide. Music, movies, television, books, things from the past that are inspired by things that have been seen by the older generation may seem like new and important to the younger generation, and the older generation may not be excited by something because they've seen it all before, but the younger generation latches on to it and says, this is something new I want to identify with, and you have a little bit of a cultural divide. The existence of this conflict is just something that's inevitable. I just find it fascinating because oftentimes you will see some pieces of media come out where the critics have a wildly different opinion on something than the average person. This subject calls back to many of the videos that I've made in the past, including the popularity is the only objective standard video that spawned some discussion in the book community. And it brings up a lot of interesting topics like, is something that was good a long time ago still good when things may have done better? Pocahontas, Dances with Wolves, Pandora, what is that movie with Pandora, the blue people? Avatar. James Cameron's Avatar is a movie that when I saw it, I was like, this is Pocahontas with cool CGI and a beautiful world, but I was not invested in the story at all because it was literally just something that I'd seen since I was a child. Maybe somebody young thought Pandora was sweet and the story was really captivating and interesting, even though it was something that was just familiar to me. I think this is constantly happening as new people enter the field. I'm going to call out a member of my Discord directly. His name is Logan. He is a younger member of the BookTube community, and he frequently has extremely different opinions than some of the older people that are in discussions with him. And I think one of the reasons is because this is someone who is experiencing the world in a modern context with modern experiences through modern eyes, as opposed to someone who is older and maybe has seen more things, might have different opinions because some things that are fresh to a new person might not be fresh to an older person. And I don't think this is an issue of right or wrong, because I think the importance of understanding something in its cultural context and its relevance then is very valuable. I think that's an academically very important topic. But as a modern topic, do things that were important in the past for art always hold significance in the future when things have been laid by the wayside and changed and art has changed so much? Another example from my own life was the time that I read The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo. The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo may have been this landmark work that's considered a classic, and it's very important for numerous reasons. But as a modern book, it feels like something that would have been chopped down to 1/3 of its original size, because the book is literally struggling to be one part telling a story and another part the author's lamenting of art and architecture. Things that are old and may have been important in their time may not hold up through modern scrutiny, and I actually truly believe that. So while I don't think that you can divorce something from its original context when looking at the historical significance, I think that it's possible to also judge old things by modern eyes and see them completely differently than maybe they were seen back in the past. I think it's possible to listen to a landmark revolutionary album from the 70s and be like, this album doesn't hold up, it's not interesting anymore. We've innovated and iterated on this thing so much that this thing sounds dated. While its significance in the past and being innovative in its context was important, it's also possible that we can look at something like that and be like, this does not hold up. This is not interesting to a modern generation that has moved so far beyond the original inception of an idea that the old thing is old and the new thing is new. And since all stories break down to a certain set of core concepts, when we talk about tropes are reused ideas or elements in books that are used over and over and over again. We often see the same tropes combined into stories in trying to be revelatory new ways, but oftentimes people that are really well read can predict how things are going to go. And as I've said in the past, I don't think something being predictable makes it not valuable. I think it's the execution, the way it resonates with people. That's the valuable part of art, is how much it can actually connect with people, how much it can make them feel things emotionally. But that's going to change vastly from person to person. People that may be experiencing something for the first time, like it's such an interesting concept. The idea that old things cannot be relevant in a modern concept. I've taken some heat when I've discussed this on Discord with different people by saying things like, hey, Beowulf just doesn't hold up in a modern context. I haven't read Beowulf, but it's an epic poem from super, super ancient history. It's not going to be engaging in the modern context. Lord of the Rings, its importance in fantasy cannot be overlooked, but Lord of the Rings is not something that a lot of modern people enjoy. The taste has just changed. The culture around fantasy has shifted. There's a lot of people that do read Lord of the Rings right now, and they find it beautiful. They find it like magical in the way that it is dated, but it is dated and it doesn't connect with a lot of people. Quest fantasy is not the mainstream right now. Character-focused fantasy is super in, and I have a feeling that character-focused fantasy may not have taken off the way that it did back when Lord of the Rings was popular. It's impossible to know. But that sort of brings back in one of the discussions I've had before, which is art subjective or objective, and I always take the take that it's subjective for the largest majority of cases. And I think the best maybe example of that is, and this is like such a weird thought experiment, but if you take a classic book from a very long time ago and released the book now, would it have the significance that it originally had in a modern context? If art was completely objective, then an amazing masterpiece work of art from the past should be able to have the same impact in the modern day from at least the critics, if not the mainstream, especially if it was something that was mainstream popular, though. If you release Star Wars as it was today, would it be a big deal? No. Now, it gets a little bit twisted because oftentimes the things that are important in the past inspired things along a chain to become what they are now, but that's the thing. If art was truly fully objective and could be separated from any subjectivity, then it would be amazing and should be recognized as amazing in every era, regardless of the cultural zeitgeist of any time period. There was a movie, and I think it was called Yesterday. It was a movie based around the concept of this dude that was, I don't know if he was just like a musician. I never saw the movie. I wanted to, but I rarely watch movies. But there was a movie that was called Yesterday. I believe the concept of the movie was a dude gets knocked out and he wakes up in a world where the Beatles never existed, and so he starts playing the Beatles song as if they were his own, and he becomes the largest artist in the world like the Beatles were back in the day. Is that a realistic concept? If the Beatles never existed, and there's some subset of a community, probably older people in the community, that said, well, the Beatles never existed, we'd never be where we are musically, and that might be true to some degree. But for a thought experiment, if the Beatles never existed and someone wrote the Beatles' entire catalog and released it today, would it matter, and would it take over the world by storm the way that it did back then? The answer's no. So is it actually objectively good, or is it good because of its significance at the time that it was released, which is my argument. And does that have to do with a generational divide and the fact that interests for different things change over time? It's a cycle. People are born, they come into art. The thing they experience that's derivative becomes new for them. It's a cycle, and it's a fascinating thing because oftentimes when you talk to the younger generation, you can learn lots of new things. And if you don't have an open mind, you start sounding like an old fart and you quickly become disconnected from the current world that you live in. I think that's what happens when people age. If someone were to take the concepts from Twilight and update them to a modern context, could Twilight take off the way and be the massive, huge thing that it was back in the 2000s? Could it be that for another generation if it were updated? If that were the case, would the fans of the original Twilight be like, dude, we've already seen this before. This is literally just a rehash of the original Twilight. Whereas people that read the new thing, the new Twilight, saw the old Twilight and like, this is old and this stuff's problematic and this stuff isn't interesting. It's a fun thing to think about. It's an interesting thing to think about. And I think that being aware of these concepts and trying to be open-minded about the way that things change over time and the way that certain things from the past feel dated in a modern context, I think it's an interesting thing to try to help bring generations together. It's also something that's interesting to think about. Is my favorite thing that's huge now actually going to stand the test of time? Because some things do and some things don't. What do you think about these concepts? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. There's also a Discord link in the description down below where lots of fun discussions happen, and I'd love to have discussions with you about this and the way that things change over time. Do you think that art is objective and it's good whether it's released in the past, whether it's released now? Do you think that when it's released has significance on its impact and its importance? Do you think that it's possible for things to just not be great once we move to the future? And I know that that hurts, right? If you are my age and something was really important to you in the past, to realize that it doesn't matter for the current generation does hurt. I come from a generation that is of an age where we didn't hate the Star Wars prequels necessarily because they came out when we were children. We were more accepting of them, and the original Star Wars movies weren't as great. I don't hate the Star Wars prequels as much as most people do that loved the originals. I've come to realize there's flaws in them, but I also recognize huge flaws in the original Star Wars movies. I think that as we move forward in time and things change, things just don't work as well. And things that are super old may have been important then, but they don't feel as important now because things have changed. I know that the same crowd that was mad at me before from some of my previous discussion videos may take great issue with this, but I think that in order to continue understanding art moving forward, we have to be able to separate context from history, I guess. What are your darlings of things that you loved that don't work in a modern context? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm the type of person that watches music videos from the early 2000s, late 90s, and think that the style in them is pretty dang cool. But I also watch music videos from what my parents think looks really cool, and I see those huge, what is that called when you in the 80s, you made your hair super huge, and I'm like, that looks ridiculous. But I'm a fan of people's jeans being so freaking baggy, you could fit DVDs and VHS tapes in the pockets. You could lose a small dog and the pant leg. Those are the things that I think look cool. And then I grew up in a generation that was really into skinny jeans. And now it seems like bell-bottom jeans are coming back, like it's the 70s or the mid-2000s again. The world is weird. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I don't know if I made a conclusion or I just talked about a bunch of things. If you'd like to see more videos from me in the future, please subscribe to the channel. If you hit the bell, you'll be notified whenever I make videos talking about this or other art concepts or books or whatever. Make sure you check out the links in the descriptions down below. I would love to talk to you again about this topic or anything else in the future. I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye. from 1 to 92. Although it's been said many times, many ways, Merry Christmas.